Hello everyone. Today our group will be reporting the Republic Act number 9147, or an act providing for the conservation and protection of wildlife resources and their habitats, appropriating funds and therefore for other purposes, signed on July 30, 2001. RA 9147 is jointly implemented by DENR, Department of Agriculture, and Palawan Council for Sustainable Development, or what we call PCSD. The DENR shall preside over all terrestrial plants and animals, turtle and tortoise, and wetland species including also crocodiles, water bird, and all amphibians, while the Department of Agriculture shall provide all aquatic habitats deemed critical, all aquatic resources including all fishes, aquatic plants, invertebrates, and all marine mammals except dugong. Yes, there are species that are endangered in our country, and this act protects them. Here are the kinds of species that this act is protecting. First, critically endangered species. These are the species or subspecies that is facing extremely high risk of extinction in the wild in the immediate future. Some examples of critically endangered species are tamarao and Cebu flower pecker. Next is the endangered species. These are the species or subspecies that is not critically endangered but whose survival in the wild is unlikely if the casual factors continue operating. Some examples of it are the Philippine eagle and crocodile. Next is the vulnerable species. These are the species or subspecies that is not critically endangered nor endangered but is under the threat from adverse factor throughout the range and is likely to move to the endangered category in the near future. Some example of it are Areca parens and spotted imperial pigeons. And lastly is the threatened species. These are the species or subspecies considered as endangered, critically endangered, vulnerable, or other accepted categories of wildlife whose population is at risk of extinction. This act was signed, and therefore this act makes it unlawful for any person to undertake the following. First, killing and destroying wildlife species, inflicting injuries, cripples, or impair the reproductive system of wildlife species, affecting any of the following critical habitats, including dumping waste products determined to the wildlife, squatting or otherwise occupying any portion of the critical habitat, mineral exploitation or extraction, and burning, logging, and quarrying. Next, introduction, reintroduction, or restocking of wildlife resources illegally, trading of wildlife, collecting, hunting, and possessing wildlife by their byproducts and derivatives, gathering or destroying of active forests, trees, host plants, and the likes, maltreating or inflicting, transporting illegally of wildlife. And because this law was officially signed, there are penalties for it. If someone did harm to critically endangered species, they have 6 years and 1 day minimum to 12 years of imprisonment with a fine of 100,000 pesos to 1 million pesos. For endangered species, they will receive 4 and 1 day to 6 years of imprisonment and a fine of 50,000 pesos to 500,000 pesos. For vulnerable species, they will experience imprisonment of 2 years and 1 day to 4 years, with a fine of 30,000 pesos to 300,000 pesos. For threatened species, they will receive 1 year and a day to 2 years of imprisonment and a fine of 20,000 pesos to 200,000 pesos. And for other wildlife species, they will have 6 months and 1 day to 1 year of imprisonment with a fine of 10,000 to 100,000 pesos. And these funds collected will be used to, first, be derived from fines imposed and damages awarded, fees, charges, donations, administrative fees, or grants. Second, administered by DENR as a special account in the National Treasury. Third, used primarily to finance rehabilitation or restoration of habitats. And lastly, will also support scientific research, enforcement, and monitoring activities as well as the enhancement of capabilities of relevant species.
The issue, problem, and concerns addressed by this law are mostly, to a considerable extent, actually related to the loss of wildlife habitat and the general extinction of many species in our country. These issues are protecting wildlife species, resources, and habitats that are being destroyed in certain ways by human activities and other factors that affect wildlife. This is arguably the main reason this law is currently in force. This law is important primarily because it helps restore balance and sustainability to wildlife resources. Interaction and dynamics between the human population and ecosystem. Numerous scientific studies around the world have shown that most new infectious diseases arise when pathogens are transmitted from animals to humans. These diseases are not caused by the presence of wild animals, but by people who exploit them and destroy their habitats. Economic growth has disrupted ecosystems and habitats through unplanned urbanization and land degradation and deforestation, which kind of is quite significant. This specifically has followed humans to interact closely with wildlife, creating breeding grounds for zoonotic diseases. The closeness and interaction of human and wildlife species and their world lead to experimentation that arises some diseases that can lead both wildlife and people to illnesses and also death.
Efforts and activities to solve the issues, problem, and concern. RA 9147, or the Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act, is a law that provides the conservation and protection of wildlife resources and habitats for sustainability. The legislation initiatives and activities to address the problem of biodiversity loss include the following: regulating the collection and trade of wildlife, complying with international treaties to protect wildlife and their habitats, initiating or supporting the scientific research to conserve biodiversity, and committing illegal acts against wildlife resources. Enforce regulations that impose penalty to those who commit illegal acts, giving wildlife management fund to rehabilitate or restore wildlife habitat and improve the skills of personnel.
Wildlife conservation aims to protect plant and animal species, and the human population encroaches on those resources. It is the practice of protecting plant and animal species and their habitats. As part of the world's ecosystem, wildlife provides balance and stability to nature's processes. The goal of wildlife conservation is to ensure the survival of these species and to educate people on living sustainability with other species. Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act, or Republic Act number 9147, an act providing for the conservation and protection of the wildlife resources and their habitats, appropriating funds therefore and other purposes. It is a measure to provide the necessary environmental policy enabling Philippine government to manage and conserve the wildlife resources of the country comprehensively. It includes a list of illegal acts that are considered detrimental to wildlife with corresponding penalties, such as imprisonment or fines or both, that are intended to serve as deterrent for violative acts against wildlife and their habitats. Why we protect wildlife? Animals and plants aren't just valuable for their own sake. They're also part of the wider natural environment that may provide food, shelter, water, and other functions for other wildlife and people.